perfect. Well, of course it works. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. I'm Robert Buxton. Thank you for coming out today on this hot day. It's been a lot recently. Thanks, Amy, for hosting me. I saw Amy not so long ago at a small church, Greer's Presbyterian, up in Caswell County. It was really great to see her. So I know some very good food there. Oh my goodness. I can't forget about it. So I want to start. As always, I like to improvise in the beginning. I like to do something spontaneous because I feel strongly that this is what they did 200 years ago or so. And then us classical folk, we stopped improvising. And I think it's too bad. So I want to do a combo of different things I've done here with improvise. I usually have some different prompt. The first part is going to be, I'm going to ask you for 4 or 5 random notes. And then I'm going to try to use that and then segue into God Bless America because it's the 250th. It was the 250th birthday. I love that piece. It's I also love who wrote it, Irving Berlin, and his story. He was born in Russia and came here and wrote pieces like that. And it's just a wonderful American story, I think. So I'm going to ask you, please, for a few individual random notes. Now, if you don't read music, don't worry. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that's all you have. You can sharp or flat them would be nice. That's going to add a little Tabasco into the improvisation. If it's all just A and D and C, it might be a little dull. So, anybody first note?
B flat.
E flat. And you both said, did you both say E flat?
I said B.
Oh, you said B flat, and I heard an E flat over here. So let's take both of those. Okay, and then maybe a couple more. Oh, you said C sharp, and then C minor. Well, let's do. Can we do C as an individual note? The reason I ask is because it's just keys. We'll just do individual notes. So that'll be the theme. How do I use that with God Bless America? I don't really know. That's why I'm doing this. It's very it's a fanfare like so we'll see. I have some pieces to play, some classical pieces to play. First, maybe some of them, I know a lot of us run into some of the same circles at the Elon Community Church. Life at Elon. A couple of these I've played over there. And so I hope I won't bore you with the same piece if you've been there. If not, well, even better. But that is going to be the first time you hear me play it. I'm always frustrated with myself how little I'm able to memorize, the speed at which I memorize. This head doesn't work as fast as I want it to. So
just wait.
That's what?
Yeah, just wait.
Well, if you know Shoko, who I'm married to, she's my wife, so you can ask her about Robert's absent-mindedness. The secret to memorizing music is that you forget everything else. So I'm already there. So here is, I'm going to start off with Ave Maria by Schubert. It's a very famous piece, but this is maybe not such a famous version on solo piano. You know, I don't sing. I'm sorry. I do my civic duty and I don't sing. You know, I have some vocalist friends, and one of them was very adamant, trying to get me to sing. They said to me, look, you know, you have to breathe deeply, you have to trust yourself. I call these hippie words. And I said, okay. So I tried it and I sang a few notes, and they said, on second thought, maybe not everybody can sing. But Liszt has arranged this piece beautifully for solo piano. A few things about the Ave Maria of Schubert. Well, first, Schubert himself, he only lived to be 31 years old. He died at 31 in 1828. And throughout his life, he was pretty obscure. He was unknown. He struggled with severe illness towards the end of his life. And he knew his time was limited. He would compose incessantly in those last years. And he died pretty much penniless and unknown, except for a small group of friends. I was also reading a slightly conflicting thing that said actually in his last year or so of life, sales of his compositions were picking up, and he was, you know, he was becoming more well known. Unfortunately, he died so prematurely. But still, I think his real recognition came after he died. There was one writer, I don't know, it was a Russian writer, I think Dostoevsky, someone who said that the best thing for a writer or a painter or a musician, it's a very dark kind of thing, that the best thing for them to be celebrated and loved is for them to no longer be alive. And it's a terrible way to put it, but this is what happened to Schubert, and Liszt came across his sheet music and was so moved that he did these arrangements for solo piano. And Liszt had two goals, I think. One was to promote Schubert, obviously. He could be a very philanthropic person. And he did that in playing these in his recitals. But another thing was he knew that playing this incredible music would make him look good too. So, you know, he had those two goals, I think. You may have heard of Listomania. Liszt was like a rock star in the early 19th century. Might remind you of the story of Paganini. Well, who was he modeling himself after? You know, think about the 60s, like the Rolling Stones, where they were, in many ways, they were like modeling themselves after the Beatles, right? So, anyway, here is this Liszt rendition of Ave Maria. What Liszt does is he's like a good translator of literature. He adds himself there too. He gives us the melody in a straightforward way in the beginning. Then later he adds a lot of curls and twirls and things like what my right hand is doing. That ain't Schubert. Liszt added that in. Why did he add that? Some people say, oh, there he's showing off again. He could be a show-off, really, he could be. But I don't think so. I think that he knew that without the singer, without the words, this could get dull. So he made it, by adding those things, he made it into a genuine piano piece. So here's Schubert Liszt Ave Maria. Oh, one more, the text, I'm sorry, the text, if I were to sing it. You've probably heard it sung with the Latin Hail Mary text, and that's not what Schubert wrote it to. It works perfectly, but he used a German text part of Sir Walter Scott's poem, The Lady of the Lake. It's also a prayer to Mary, but it's a German translation of that. It's a different text. So anyway, here is the piece. That's something to just tell people when you have dinner, just to say, hey, did you know? And, depending on how you say it, you can, show a little. I'm just kidding. Don't do it that way. So I want to tell you a quick story about Shoko. Many of you know Shoko. She plays for the community church, Elon Community Church down the road. And this happened actually, she's often asked to play Ave Maria for weddings. And she did recently. There was Holly and Mark's wedding, but there was a time, I think this was a long time ago, maybe when we were students in Texas. And maybe it was even before that. I don't exactly remember, but she told me this story that she was playing for a wedding, and they said to her, "Could you please play Ave Maria?" And she said, "Which one?" And they said, maybe not these exact words, but something to the effect of, "Well, don't get smart with us. There's only one Ave Maria." Well, there's not. There are many. There's even more than 2 or 3. There's Max Rager wrote a beautiful one. I was listening to it in the car. That's where I listen to all the music I don't know about in the car. And this is, I'm going to play next another Ave Maria. This is the Bach-Gounod Ave Maria, which is also well known, maybe not quite as famous as the last one. But there's a wonderful story behind this. In the 1850s, Charles Gounod was spending some time with his father-in-law, and they were looking at Bach. They were looking at the C major prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier by Bach. Maybe you know the piece. It's famous. If you're Glenn Gould, you might play it different ways to interpret. Now, Gounod, speaking of improvising, he just spontaneously came up with this melody over the piece. I think the father-in-law was playing, I guess they had a couple pianos or organs, I don't know, and the father-in-law was playing the Bach, and Gounod just improvised this melody, which goes like this. And that's what it was. So Gounod edited this, actually the father-in-law jotted it all down. And Gounod sort of touched it up, published it as a violin piece. See, I'm kind of in between a violin and vocal. I'm in this purgatory right now. There's a lot of vocal arrangements, so that's kind of my next area, because I can't sing and I try to live through arrangements, pretend to be a singer. Anyway, he published it as, I think he called it like Meditation on Bach, or it was in French, Méditation sur Prélude de Bach. Okay, then he added the Ave Maria text, and not the German one that Schubert did. He did add the Latin Hail Mary prayer, Ave Maria. And so there's actually some wonderful recordings that blend the voice and the violin, like Jascha Heifetz, who's just my ultimate, hero. My goodness, I love Heifetz. I wish I could have done it. He played it straight through, and then the second time through, there was a big choir that sang it. So it's kind of a violin piece, and it's also sort of a vocal piece. So this all gets kind of messy, right? Because you see the music comes out in a very messy way. This is an arrangement for solo piano by Georges Bizet, who wrote Carmen. So if you think about it, this is a 4-person composition. It's Bach. It's Gounod. It's the father-in-law, and I forgot his name. I should know it. And then it's Bizet. Bach, Gounod, father-in-law, Bizet. Did I say, I think if everyone looked at Bach with their in-laws, the world would be a better place. So that's the lesson here. gospel, because it's Ave Maria. So now I'm going to play you more secular as a love song, also a vocal piece. This is Robert Schumann's Widmung, or dedication. And the text, if I were to sing, and I absolutely can't sing in German, nevertheless sing at all, the text is by Friedrich Ruckert. And you know, when I went to Germany and Austria, you know, people told me there, they said, your pronunciation is actually perfect, but everything else is terrible. So that's my claim to fame with the German language. Schumann wrote this as a wedding present for his fiancée, Clara. Clara Wieck became Clara Schumann. She herself was a brilliant pianist and composer, and their path to getting married was a shaky one. So, Clara's father, Frederick Wieck, was Robert Schumann's piano teacher. Yeah, and you could say that he didn't approve of Robert as a suitor for his daughter. One of the reasons was that Schumann damaged his hands. Not exactly clear why he may have over-practiced. You know, he was not a child prodigy, which Clara was, by the way. He was not a child prodigy. He was trying to maybe make up for lost time, practiced like crazy. I think I played you some of his Paganini arrangements. Well, I don't understand why those might damage someone's hands. I almost did mine. But I'm not playing them anymore. I finished the set and my hands feel better. But I really think that the real reason, that's not really true. It's that I think it didn't hurt. Look, piano playing's not supposed to hurt, okay? It might hurt your brain sometimes without your hands. So he probably used a contraption, a wooden contraption meant to strengthen his pinky finger and damage the muscles in his hands that way. And this is a kind of an obsessive, it's not a very sane idea. And I will say, I think the central thing with Schumann's life, I may have talked about this, I play a lot of Schumann, and I love Schumann very much. I think his music is so real and vulnerable and human. He had bipolar disorder, or what people think was bipolar. It could have been some other, but he had a severe mental illness. And he had these mood extremes. And this piece is manic. It's a manic sort of thing. But he definitely, if you read his writings and you look at his music, he vacillates between these extremes of mood. And if you know someone with bipolar, I know some people, and all of the people I know who have it are extremely sensitive and wonderful people, and good, very creative. Schumann also was, he was a good husband, he was a great father. Not a lot of the classical composers were, I'll tell you that much, like Wagner, oh boy. And that's why I say people like to say, it's popular to say that Schumann was crazy in his music. No, he wasn't crazy. He was a wonderful, he was a very good person who had this horrible condition. Wagner, yes, was crazy. So now, what I love about this is I think this piece depicts the feeling of being in love. If you're in love, look, I'm from New Jersey. I know some of you might be too. You know how we talk in New Jersey. I lost my accent, but when I go back, it comes back. This is sort of a very casual way of talking, like, hey, how you doing? You know? Yeah. I heard a guy, we went to breakfast in Graham with Shepherds, and there was a guy sitting near us, and he was talking, he said, yeah, so, I was talking to my buddy over in Queens, and I'm thinking, you are not from here. But when the Schumann's music speaks differently. This piece in particular, it has a heightened feeling of, if you're talking to the person you're in love with, you might not talk like that. Your heart rate might be elevated, you might feel butterflies in your stomach, and this piece, it does all of those things. Look at the beginning. This part right here, which is like the butterflies to me, feels like that. It's always on the edge. It's never comfortable with Schumann. I made the mistake of playing some Schumann for my teacher, my very Russian teacher, Vladimir Vyorogol, and he would never filter things. And that could be a blessing, And I played for him, I don't remember what Schumann, but let's just say it was this piece, and I played it in this manner, in a very, calm manner. It's not Schumann. He said, "It's very pretty, but I feel like you are drinking coffee, eating sausage, having a nice breakfast. This is not Schumann. You know, Schumann is on fire." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. Schumann's music has to be, always on fire." So here is the piece. This is arranged by Liszt once again. Now, Liszt and Robert Schumann, they got along. They weren't very close friends with me, but they did get along. However, Clara Schumann absolutely hated Liszt. She called him a spoiled child. I don't think she was completely wrong, but I love Liszt very much. But he was a complicated person, right? Now, here's a little prank that Liszt played on Clara. He knew about this. I think he even knew about that quote. And so he knew that Clara absolutely despised over-the-top Paganini arrangements. I played you some of Brahms' Paganini variations, I think, last time. And even Brahms, who she was very close to, and possibly after Schumann's death, they possibly were together, it's not clear. But even that piece, she called them wretched witches variations. She hated over-the-top arrangements of Paganini. So when Liszt wrote his Paganini studies, guess who he dedicated them to? Big bold letters dedicated to Clara Schumann, because he knew, that he would. Anyway, so that's the Schumanns and Liszt. This is Robert Schumann's Widmung, arranged by Liszt. Schumann so much. He's no words really. I mean, I said a lot of words, but I think at the end of the day, with any music, but especially Schumann, there's no words for what it is. Next, I'm going to play a piece I learned pretty recently, maybe too recently. This is the Intermezzo number 1 by Manuel Ponce. If that name rings a bell for anybody, he was a Mexican composer from the turn of the last century. This piece he wrote in 1908. And he's especially well known for his guitar music, but he wrote lots of other things. He wrote piano music and other things that, his story is like that of many Latin American composers and US American composers. He went to study in Berlin, and he absorbed the European classical styles of that time. This piece, it's a salon piece, really. It even sounds maybe a little bit like Chopin. But he came back to Mexico and added Mexican folk features, folk music into his compositions. And so there's this blend, and I think there was maybe a tension inside him. Should I be a European composer, or should I really just make a new path and just be a Mexican composer? And so what the folk idea is, in a lot of Mexican folk music, you have thirds. Remember music theory, this is an interval, 2 notes at the same time. And he does that. This is, by the way, it's a wonderfully melancholy piece. Think of a U.S. American composer who's incredible. This is Aaron Copland. Where did he study? He was born in Queens, just like that guy in the restaurant this morning was talking about. He was from Queens. Yeah. So Aaron Copland was born in Queens, and where did he study? He went to Paris to study with Nadia Boulanger. You don't get more French than that. And then he came back to America in the 1930s during the Depression. And what did he write? He wrote Billy the Kid and Rodeo and Appalachian Spring. That's the same path that he went to Europe, found himself kind of as a truly American composer. So, and then a couple, with music, I believe music speaks. It's like talking. And one doesn't necessarily have to speak the language. I dabble in languages and speak a lot of them horribly. Really, it's just say a few words and pretend. But I think that I don't feel I'm quite doing justice to this piece. And my teacher, one of my main teachers, Solomon Yukovsky, was from Cuba, from Havana. And he really would be very critical of how I'm playing this. I'm sure I'll tell you about him. I also imitate him. I don't know what's with the impressions today, but whatever. So he had this way of talking that I would imitate, and he said it didn't sound like him, but that's wrong. He was wrong about one thing, that. And I would even, call other students with his voice. There's a way to screen your number. I don't do this anymore, but Shoko stopped me from doing this. But I would, he would assign us Cuban classical composers. Ignacio Cervantes is one I play a lot. And I would play a piece, and he would always say, you just do not understand how to play it. You're not from there. How do you know? Talking in the back of his throat. And I said, okay, great. So one time I worked so hard, I listened to recordings of singers and things. And he was silent for a good while. And then he said to me, why do you even bother? So finally he got all his students together in a room like this. And he had a lot of students, and he assigned us all a different piece by a Cuban composer, short piece. And one by one, each of the students would get up, play for all the other students and him. They'd finish, and he would just say, no, it's terrible. It's not Cuba. Okay? We even had a student, I think he was an exchange student from Cuba, who played, and he said, it's a little bit better, but still bad. So, anyway, here's Manuel Ponce, with all that in mind. my teacher about being very encouraging with Latin American composers. He was very encouraging in other ways, other areas. It reminds me of him, that piece, and so it brings a little smile to my face because I think about him when I play it. It speaks Spanish, and the next piece I'm going to play speaks Russian. This is Rachmaninoff, and it reminds me, I didn't plan on talking about this, but my late uncle, Boris. I'm half Russian, my mother's Russian. My mother married my dad, who's immigrant, also from Southern Virginia. You've heard me tell that before. So she became very, she's still very Russian, but she became more kind of American. And my uncle Boris never really assimilated. He loved America, of course, but he was very Russian. And I remember when I was growing up, he's not a musician, neither is my mother, but my uncle was a very literary person. He was reading a lot. He was a writer, a Russian novelist. Amazing. He translated some of it as, wow. So, but I'd be playing Rachmaninoff at home, and he would tell me, he'd say, he doesn't speak Russian. He has to speak Russian. And I worked on it with him, with the phrasing. Again, he wasn't a pianist, but he knew how to, and I think he helped me with this. So I learned a lot from him. This Rachmaninoff, his life was all about nostalgia, I believe. He was born in Tsarist Russia in 1873, and half of his life was 19th century pre-revolutionary Russia. And then the second half, roughly, of his life was in the US. He never went back. And it was in the 20th century, so these vastly different worlds. And he felt this kind of dislocation. And I think about, my uncle and my mother, it's a similar thing, too, this cultural dislocation. And Rachmaninoff, again, he loved America, but he felt so nostalgic for home that he had one of the houses he lived in was an exact replica of his house in Russia. This reminds me of a story. My mother called me, my parents lived very close, and my mother calls me up and says, Robert, I make borscht. You have to come eat. And this was around the July 4th weekend. I said, Mom, look, it's 100 degrees outside. It's 100% humidity just about. This is North Carolina. I think I'm gonna it's not the right time. She said, no, but it's like Russia. And that's what I'm talking about, nostalgia. It's not the most practical thing to eat a very heavy, hot soup in the middle of summer, but hey, it reminds her of home. And so, this is the Rhapsody on the theme of Paganini. I'm not going to play you the whole thing because I don't have the whole thing. Sorry, it's like Buc-ee's. It's taking me forever. I live near there, so they keep saying it's going to be ready in 2026. No, 27. I'm making my own arrangement for solo piano. It's a piano and orchestra piece. And I can't fit a whole orchestra here, sorry. So, and I can't afford it either, so I made my own version for condensed, smushed it all into one piano part. That's the technical, theoretical term for it, smushed. So, I call these vignettes through the rearview mirror, because some of it is, to me, sounds very American, like the beginning. Russian man in Midtown Manhattan to me. Then, it's loosely based on Paganini's 24th Caprice. I've played maybe at least a dozen pieces based on that idea alone. But Rachmaninoff doesn't do a regular theme and variations. He gives you the theme a little and then he goes into some other direction. You're also going to hear the sound of Russian church bells. He was a devout Russian Orthodox Christian. Although actually the church excommunicated him for marrying his cousin. In all his music, the bells. I was talking to my dad, the Southern Virginia dad, about Rachmaninoff and marrying his cousin, and my dad says, well, that sounds pretty darn Southern to me. I said, I don't know. So, yeah. So, here is another melody that he uses in his late music. This is a late piece of Rachmaninoff. Ever heard that before? That's the Dies Irae chant from the Middle Ages, the Day of Wrath. And Stanley Kubrick uses that in The Shining when they're driving up the mountain to that creepy hotel and Jack Nicholson has that snarl on his face. It makes you shiver. And I think that he was thinking about his own mortality. Rachmaninoff, he was seeing what was happening in the world, not only in Russia, but in the Soviet Union by then. The Second World War was starting. Rachmaninoff, it's like Schumann. He suffered from what was probably clinical depression. And he had many episodes of that throughout his life, but one particular episode was in 1917 after leaving Russia. He couldn't compose for like 15 years or so. He performed, he edited pieces, but it all dried up because he was so nostalgic for Russia. And then in the 30s, it came back, and this is one of those pieces he wrote at that time. Have I told you the story? If I did, I don't need to tell it again. My grandfather, how he met Rachmaninoff, and how Rachmaninoff spoke to him. Okay, I'll tell it. If I told it to you, sorry, because I tell this story a lot. My dad's father, the Virginia side, was in dental school in Richmond, Virginia in the 1930s. Sam Buxton, my grandfather. And he had a part-time job. He loved classical music. He had a part-time job as a backstage usher. And then one night, Rachmaninoff himself was giving a recital there. Can't believe it. And the boss told my grandfather, stand by these doors, don't let anybody through. Guard the doors with your life, they said. Okay. Well, 10 minutes later, somebody tried to open the doors. My grandfather pushed back. There was a tug of war, and the 6.5-foot tall Rachmaninoff himself kicked the door open. It was him. You know how he looked? Have you seen pictures? He had a shaved head, never smiled. Somebody said he looked like a convict on the loose. And he spoke to my grandfather. You know what he said? He said, get out of my way. So I have a personal connection with him. So here is some of about 1/3 of the piece. And you might also hear some of that anger in there. I do. I do take it a little personal. when Bucky's is done. So, I don't know, can I go another 5 minutes? Is that, okay. So, short, you know what, let me play you, I may have played this for you last time, I don't know. The 18th variation of this piece. It's kind of the soul of the piece. It's where all the nostalgia just comes out. He takes Paganini, turns it upside down, new melody. Maybe you've heard, I think I may have played it, I learned this a long time ago, and then I learned the rest of it afterwards. So here is that part. It's very famous. It's in movies, Somewhere in Time with Jane Seymour and Christopher Reeve. That's a great movie. The critics hated it, but so what? And that's a piece about being lost in time travel, and that's kind of what Rachmaninoff was. And I think in that piece, he actually goes back to his young style, the style of music he wrote when he was in Russia. It's like he's dreaming of home again in there. So I'm going to close with a couple short gospels. Yes, I grew up on all the Russian stuff with my mother, my uncle, and then my dad would come home and say, when are you going to learn some real music? So I'm going to play, this is a piece I played, unfortunately, at a funeral for a great friend recently, and she loved this song. She had a very long and full life, but it's always sad to lose someone, and this is one of her favorite songs, so I thought I'd play around with it too. This is called In My Heart There Rings a Melody. want to read one. This is on the Jericho Road, although the Jericho Road is not easy to go on. So, and this is an old-timey gospel song. It's one of those that they don't really sing in churches anymore, and I think that's too bad. So here's On the Jericho Road. We'll close with that. Thank you for having me and for coming out today, and drink lots of water and be careful out there. It's hot.